what affects your mind?
Yeah.
And how does Big Pharma affect your mind?
Yeah. Number one, the information that comes through legitimate sources that doctors have been taught to rely on, evidence-based medicine, the articles in peer-reviewed journals, the guidelines that are issued. Now, those are problematic because when an article is peer-reviewed and published in a respected journal, people and doctors obviously assume that the peer reviewers have had access to the data, and they've independently analyzed the data, and they corroborate the findings in the manuscript that was submitted, or they give feedback to the authors and say, we disagree with you on this point, and would you please check our analysis, and if you agree with us, make it. That's what they assume the peer review process is, but it's not. The peer reviewers don't have the data. The peer reviewers have the manuscript that's been submitted by usually in conjunction with or by the drug company that manufactures the drug. So peer reviewers are unable to perform the job that doctors think they're performing to vet the data to assure that it's accurate and reasonably complete. They can't do it. And then we have the clinical practice guidelines, which are increasingly more important as the flow of information keeps getting brisker and brisker, and docs need to get to the bottom line quickly. Clinical practice guidelines become much more important. And we assume that the authors of those clinical practice guidelines have independently analyzed the data from the clinical trials and make their recommendations that set the standards of care based on their analysis. That's not what happens. The experts who write the clinical trials rely almost entirely on the publications presenting the results of the clinical trials, which are peer-reviewed, but the peer reviewers haven't had access to the data. So we've got a system of the highest level of evidence that doctors have been trained over and over again to rely on to practice evidence-based medicine to be good doctors that has not been verified.
Do you think that data that's coming from the pharma companies, do you think what level of manipulation is going on with that data? Is it at the study design level? Is it at literally there's some data that you just keep off, keep out of the charts, keep out of the aggregate analysis that you then publish? Or is it the worst case, which is just change some of the numbers?
It happened. All three happen. I don't know what the denominator is,
right.
But I spent about 10 years in litigation. And for example, in Vioxx, which was withdrawn from the market in 2004 in the biggest drug recall in American history, the problem was that it got recalled when a study that Merck sponsored showed that Vioxx more than doubled the risk of heart attacks, strokes, and blood clots, serious blood clots. It got pulled then. But there was a bigger study that had been published in 2000 in the New England Journal of Medicine that showed that Vioxx was a better drug for arthritis and pain, not because it was more effective. It's no more effective than Aleve or Advil, but because it was less likely to cause serious GI complications, bleeds and perforations in the gut. Now, in that study that was published in the New England Journal, that was never corrected, it was a little bit modified 15 months after the drug was taken off the market, but never corrected. Merck left out 3 heart attacks. And the FDA knew that Merck left out 3 heart attacks. And the FDA's analysis of the data from that study said that the FDA wasn't going to do the analysis without the 3 heart attacks in it. And the important part of this story is that there were 12 authors listed on that study in the New England Journal. 2 were Merck employees. They knew about the 3 heart attacks that had been omitted. The other 10 authors, the academic authors, didn't know about it. They hadn't seen that data. So Merck they had an excuse. It's complicated, and the FDA didn't accept it, so there's no reason to go into it. But Merck just left out the 3 heart attacks. And the 3 heart attacks, it may seem 3 heart attacks in a 10,000 person study may seem like nothing, except they completely changed the statistics so that had the 3 heart attacks been included, the only conclusion that Merck could have made was that Vioxx significantly increased the risk of heart attack. And they abbreviated their endpoint from heart attacks, strokes, and blood clots to just heart attacks.
Yeah. So those are maybe in their mind, they're also playing by the rules because of some technical excuse that you mentioned that was rejected. How can this, because this is crossing
let me interrupt.
Yeah.
No, that's not true. The study was completed. The blind was broken, meaning they looked at the data, in March of 2000. The article was published in the New England Journal in November of 2000. In March of 2000, there was an email by the head scientist that was published in the Wall Street Journal that said, the day that the data were unblinded, that it's a shame that the cardiovascular events are there, but the drug will do well and we will do well.
But removing the 3 heart attacks, how does that happen? Like, who has to convince themselves? Is this pure malevolence?
You have to be the judge of that. But the person who was in charge of the Data Safety Monitoring Board issued a letter that said they'll stop counting cardiovascular events a month before the trial is over, and they'll continue counting GI events. And that person got a contract to consult with Merck for $5,000 a day, I think for 12 days a year, for 1 or 2 years. That was signed, that contract was signed within 2 weeks of the decision to stop counting heart attacks.
I want to understand that man or woman. I've been reading a lot about Nazi Germany and thinking a lot about the good Germans, because I want to understand so that we can each encourage each other to take the small heroic actions that prevents that. Because it feels to me, removing malevolence from the table, where it's just a pure psychopathic person, that there's just a momentum created by the game, like you mentioned.
Yes.
And so it takes reversing the momentum within a company, I think, requires many small acts of heroism. Not gigantic, I'm going to leave and become a whistleblower and publish a book about it, but small, quiet acts of pressuring against this. Like, what are we doing here? We're trying to help people. Is this the right thing to do? Looking in the mirror constantly and asking, is this the right thing to do? I mean, that's what integrity is. Acknowledging the pressures you're under and then still be able to zoom out and think, what is the right thing to do here?